What if the past holds secrets that could change everything we think we know? Hidden relics, strange wonders, and mysteries that defy explanation await discovery. Welcome to Unearthed Secrets, your gateway to history's most puzzling and fascinating stories. If you're curious about the unknown, don't forget to subscribe and join us on this incredible journey, and tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. Let's begin. The desert glass that shouldn't exist. It begins with silence, not the light, ordinary quiet that rests between voices, but the kind of silence that presses down upon the land, as if the air itself has been holding its breath for thousands of years. In the far reaches of the Sahara, where sand meets horizon and the horizon meets the pale blue sky, there is a place where the wind does not sing, where the dunes seem reluctant to shift, and where the earth holds a secret that has puzzled scientists, explorers, and dreamers alike. Here, scattered across an expanse of remote Egyptian desert, are shards of something that looks as though it belongs nowhere on Earth. They are smooth in some places, jagged in others, chunks of brilliant yellow-green silica glowing faintly in the unrelenting sun. They lie half buried in the sand, as if the desert is both hiding them and displaying them at the same time. To pick one up is to feel an unexpected weight, a coolness that contrasts with the burning air around you. Hold it up to the light, and it gleams like frozen sunlight. This is Libyan desert glass, a material that should not exist here. No volcano in the region could have made it. No lightning strike could have produced this much, and no ancient human furnace could have reached the unimaginable temperatures needed to create it. Yet here it lies, in the middle of one of the driest places on Earth, scattered in a field that stretches for hundreds of square kilometers. The first accounts from the modern world came from the early 20th century, when explorers on camelback began reporting strange yellow stones littering the dunes near the Libyan border. But it was not the first time human eyes had seen it. Ancient Egyptians, more than 3,000 years ago, had already found it, shaped it, and revered it. One piece, carved into the shape of a scarab beetle, was set into the center of a pendant found among the treasures of Pharaoh Tutankhamun's tomb. The gemstone, examined under modern microscopes, was revealed to be this very desert glass, over 1,000 years older than the boy king himself. And so the question arises, how did it form? To answer, one must walk not only across the desert, but through time. The sands here are not empty. Beneath them lie the remnants of ancient lake beds, fossilized bones of prehistoric animals, and fragments of human tools that date back tens of thousands of years. This was once a land alive with rivers and grasslands, but nothing in that long history explains the glass. For decades, the leading theory was that it formed in the heat of a meteorite impact. After all, elsewhere on Earth, such as at Meteor Crater in Arizona, scientists had found glassy material created by the immense heat of space rock slamming into the ground. Such impacts can generate temperatures higher than 1,600 degrees Celsius, hot enough to melt quartz-rich sand into pure silica glass. But when geologists searched this desert for the telltale signs of an impact, a crater, shocked quartz crystals, or layers of melted rock, they found nothing. No crater, no bowl-shaped depression, no obvious center to the scattered field of glass. It was as if the glass had appeared without the violence that usually creates it. The next theory was even stranger. Perhaps the heat came not from a direct impact, but from a cosmic airburst, a meteorite exploding in the atmosphere above the desert. Such explosions, like the Tunguska event in Siberia in 1908, can release as much energy as a large nuclear bomb. The shockwave and heat could, in theory, melt the surface sand over a vast area without leaving a crater. If this was the case, then the desert glass was the result of a catastrophe witnessed by no one, an ancient fireball that turned the ground itself to liquid before cooling into solid, unearthly beauty. But this too had its problems. The size and purity of Libyan desert glass is unmatched anywhere else in the world, and some samples show crystal structures that suggest an even hotter, more sustained heat than an airburst could provide. Others have wondered if the answer lies not above, but below. Deep volcanic eruptions, now long extinct, might have forced molten silica to the surface, but the surrounding geology is stubbornly ordinary. Sandstone, quartz, and the weathered remains of ancient seabeds. No volcanic vents, no lava flows, no ash layers. The desert offers no easy answers, and so researchers have come, one after another, each walking the same endless dunes, each stooping to pick up a shard of glass and hold it to the sun, each asking the same questions. Scientists from Egypt, Europe, America, and beyond have mapped its distribution, measured its composition, and compared it to samples from impact sites and nuclear test ranges. One of the most intriguing clues comes from microscopic analysis. Under magnification, Libyan desert glass reveals tiny bubbles trapped inside, bubbles of ancient atmosphere, frozen in time. In some cases, they contain traces of minerals that could only have formed at pressures and temperatures beyond anything in recorded human experience. Some researchers believe these clues point firmly toward an origin in the sky. A comet or asteroid, skimming close enough to blast the desert with a wave of superheated air, could have generated the necessary temperatures without leaving a crater. In this scenario, the glass is the remnant of a fleeting moment, sand lifted into the air, melted into liquid, and rained back down as glowing droplets that cooled where they landed. Others, however, point to patterns in the glass distribution that suggest a single intense flashpoint, now erased by the shifting sands and the slow work of erosion. If a crater once existed, perhaps it has been swallowed by the desert itself, yet the mystery endures not just because of what we do not know, but because of what the glass has become. For those who have held it, whether in the hand of an ancient artisan shaping it into a sacred scarab, or in the laboratory of a modern geologist peering into its crystal structure, it is more than a geological oddity. It is a bridge across time, a connection between a moment of unimaginable violence and the calm eternity of the desert that now cradles it. The sun begins to sink over the dunes, the shadows lengthen, though here, in this place, there is little to cast them. The glass in your hand glows faintly, as if the day's heat lingers within it. Around you, the silence remains unbroken, the air still as a held breath. Somewhere out there, scattered in the endless sand, are countless more pieces, waiting for the next traveler to find them. And perhaps one day the desert will yield the full truth of their birth, or perhaps it will keep that secret, letting the glass gleam quietly under the sun, a reminder that even the most barren places can hold beauty born of fire. The stone bird that faced the stars. Far from the restless cities and the ceaseless noise of modern life, in the hills of southern Africa, there is a place where the stones seem older than time itself. Here the air is sharp with the scent of grass, baked under a relentless sun, and the wind moves in slow, deliberate currents, as though it has been traveling across the land for centuries before finding its way here. The ground is a tapestry of pale soil and jagged outcrops, each telling its own story in the language of cracks and shadows. And somewhere among these silent hills stands the stone bird, a figure carved by hands that no living person has ever known, its gaze forever lifted toward a patch of sky that seems at first glance no different from any other. The bird is not large, not in the way that colossal statues or towering monuments dominate their landscapes. In fact, its size could almost be overlooked, roughly the height of a seated person, its wings folded close to its sides, its beak pointed with an elegance that suggests both patience and purpose. But what arrests the eye is not its size, it is the way the bird stands. The stone from which it is carved is not native to this hilltop, nor to the region at all. Whoever made it carried or hauled it here, shaping it with tools whose marks are so faint now that they can be mistaken for the natural weathering of rock. The bird faces a direction that on ordinary nights reveals only a scatter of familiar stars, but once in a vast cycle of time, once every 26,000 years, its gaze aligns with something extraordinary, a constellation that only the slow turning of the Earth's axis can bring back into view. The people who live near these hills call the statue Chennoka, the silent watcher. Elders say it has always been there, that it was already ancient when their great-great-grandparents first saw it. It is not fenced or protected by modern barriers, it simply stands as it always has, alone on its rise of ground, its surface warm under the sun by day and cool to the touch under the silver wash of the moon. The first Europeans to write about it were missionaries in the late 19th century. Their journals speak of a curious carving, weathered but unmistakable in its form, sitting on an alignment with the rising of certain bright stars. At the time no one thought much of it. It was merely one of many strange relics scattered across the Zimbabwean plateau, alongside ruined stone walls and enigmatic soapstone figurines. But even in those earliest reports, there is a sense of unease, as though the missionaries understood they were looking at something whose meaning they could not possibly grasp. Modern archaeologists have tried to measure and date the statue, but the results are slippery. The granite it is made from resists erosion well, which makes it hard to determine its age through wear alone. The tool's marks, if they are tool marks, have been softened by time, and there is no direct evidence, no inscription or nearby artifact, that can tie it to a specific known culture. It stands outside the usual timelines, like a loose page from history that somehow drifted free of the book. What is certain is the alignment. Surveyors have confirmed it. The bird faces the point on the horizon where thousands of years from now, a constellation will rise again into view. This is not an alignment to the sun, as with many ancient monuments, nor to the moon. It is tied to the precession of the Earth, the slow wobble of our planet's axis that shifts the positions of the stars over millennia. The builders could not have seen that future alignment themselves. They carved and placed the statue for an audience far beyond their own lives, perhaps far beyond their own civilization. It is here that the mystery deepens. How could they have known? In our modern world, the precession of the equinoxes is measured and calculated through centuries of astronomical observation and careful record keeping. But the people who carved the bird, by all conventional timelines, should not have had such data, or, if they did, it has left no other trace. Did they inherit this knowledge from an older culture, now entirely lost to us? Did they observe patterns over generations and extrapolate into a future so distant it would take the span of recorded history to reach? Or is the alignment a coincidence, a chance of stone and sky that only appears intentional to us now? Local legends tell of a bird that carried the wisdom of the heavens in its wings. Some say it was a messenger from the stars, that it flew down in an age before memory and taught the first people where to plant their crops, when to move their cattle, when to prepare for floods or droughts. The bird, they say, returned to the sky when its work was done, but left its image behind, so that future generations would remember to look upward. In the language of these hills, there is no sharp line between history and myth. The two are threads in the same fabric. When you stand before the statue at dusk, the air cooling and the land slowly dimming to grey, it is easy to believe those stories. The bird is not merely looking at the stars, it seems to be waiting for them, patient beyond human measure. Its stone feathers are rough, but the curve of its neck is graceful, almost lifelike. There is a presence to it, a stillness that feels alive, as though the stone itself is aware of your steps approaching. If you touch it, you find the surface surprisingly smooth in places, as though countless hands have rested there over the centuries, and perhaps they have, hands of farmers, warriors, travelers, children, hands of people who stood where you are standing now, who looked from the bird's beak to the same sweep of horizon, and wondered what it meant. We do not know who carved the stone bird, nor what stories they told as they worked the granite. We do not know whether they saw themselves as building a monument, or whether it was a simple act of devotion, an offering to the sky. But we do know that they placed it carefully, and that its gaze will meet its mark long after our own cities have crumbled, long after our names have been forgotten. The bird waits, as it has always waited. The stars turn slowly, the Earth's axis tilts ever so slightly with each passing century, and somewhere in that vast clockwork, the appointed moment draws closer. None alive today will see it. But when it comes, when the constellation rises exactly where the bird is looking, it will be as if a conversation across 26,000 years is finally answered. And perhaps that is the true wonder of the stone bird, not simply that it exists, but that it reminds us how small our own lives are against the backdrop of time, and how large the hopes of those who came before us must have been, to set their eyes on a night sky they would never see. The skeleton wrapped in meteorite beads. It begins in the scorched stillness of the Egyptian desert, where the wind moves like a whisper over stone and sand. There, in a place where the horizon wavers in the heat and the earth remembers more than it will ever tell, a burial was found. The body was ancient, older than the pyramids, older than the great pharaohs whose names still echo through time. It lay beneath layers of ochre earth, cradled in the arms of history, and around its neck, unlike anything else from the sands of Egypt, was a strand of beads that had once fallen from the sky. These were not of gold, nor carnelian, nor faience. They were hammered from iron that had never known a furnace, metal that had not been mined from the earth, but pulled instead from the vault of the heavens. Each bead, dark and cold even in the desert sun, carried within it the memory of its burning descent through the atmosphere, thousands of years before a human hand had touched it. Archaeologists uncovered the beads slowly, brushing away millennia of dust with strokes as light as breath. At first they assumed the material was terrestrial, perhaps an early form of smelted iron, rare and precious in that far-off age. But the metal told a different story. Under the microscope, its structure was unlike any earth-forged iron. Embedded within it were crystalline patterns, the Widman-Stetton lines, which only form under the slow cooling of metal in the vacuum of space. That was when the truth emerged. This necklace was not born of fire and furnace, but of stars and silence. The iron had once been part of a meteorite, wandering for countless ages between worlds before falling to the sands of ancient Egypt. and somehow the people of that time, 5,000 years ago, had known how to shape it, hammering the brittle celestial metal into thin strips, then curling them into beads. No forge, no melting, just patience, persistence, and the will to carry a piece of the sky. The grave itself belonged to a person of status, though not royalty. Their bones spoke of a life lived under the relentless sun, muscles worked hard, yet nourished with care. Around them lay small offerings, fragments of pottery, traces of linen, a stone blade dulled by time. But it was the necklace that drew the mind away from earthbound things. It is easy to imagine the life this person lived, and the moment when those beads were first laid upon their neck. Did they feel the weight of the sky upon their skin? Did they know that no other person they passed in the market or along the riverbank wore anything like it? The Nile might have shimmered in the morning light, but around their neck, the stars themselves had come to rest. In ancient Egypt, iron was called bayat nempet, metal from heaven. Long before furnaces could coax iron from ore, the only iron people knew came from meteorites. To possess it was to hold a fragment of eternity, a gift from the gods themselves. Perhaps these beads were believed to carry power, or protection, or the blessing of the sky god Nut, whose great arch formed the roof of the world. Perhaps they were worn only on sacred occasions, when rituals demanded that the heavens be called down to earth. The shaping of such metal would have been a delicate and dangerous art. Meteoric iron is hard but brittle, a careless strike could shatter it. The maker, perhaps a smith, perhaps a ritual artisan, would have needed to work slowly, tapping with measured blows, coaxing the metal into thin flat strips, then curling them into tiny cylinders. Hours of labor for each bead, with no certainty the next strike wouldn't ruin it all. And the metal itself would have been rare beyond imagining. A single meteorite fall might scatter pieces across the sands, but only those who knew how to look could find them. The desert winds cover their tracks quickly, yet the people of that age were watchers of the sky. They would have seen the fiery streak when the meteor fell, felt the ground tremble faintly, then walked days or weeks to the place where it had landed. They may have found it half buried, still carrying the chill of space, still smelling faintly of the cosmic fire that had scorched it on entry. The burial site, a low mound along a dry wadi, would have looked unremarkable to the untrained eye, but in its earth was a history reaching far beyond the Nile Valley. The beads were older than the life they adorned, older than the civilization that shaped them, older even than the deserts they now lay in. They had formed in the heart of a long-dead star, ejected into the galaxy before the Earth was young. To hold one of those beads was to hold a story written across billions of years. Centuries later, when Egypt's great monuments rose along the river, iron from the sky still held its power. Pharaoh Tutankhamun himself was buried with a dagger forged from a meteorite, a reminder that even in the age of gold, the metal from heaven was treasured. The beads found in this earlier grave show that the reverence for celestial iron was not born in the time of kings, but in the deep roots of Egypt's past. Yet there is something about this necklace that feels different from the royal treasures. Its beads are not flawless or perfectly shaped. Some are bent, others bear tiny cracks. They are not the work of an imperial workshop, but of human hands working in a small sunlit place, perhaps with no more than a stone anvil and a dream of the sky. They carry not the grandeur of empire, but the quiet pride of a people who could turn the rarest gift of the heavens into something they could wear close to the heart. What was the journey of these beads before they came to rest in the grave? Were they traded along the Nile, passed from hand to hand like whispers of the gods, or had they always belonged to this person, found by their own family, hammered in the shade of their own home? Did the metal carry stories from far-off places, or was it a secret kept only within the circle of those who had seen the meteor fall? Even the act of burying them is telling. In many ancient cultures, objects of great value were passed to descendants. To place such a rare and powerful thing in the ground was a sacrifice, perhaps an offering to the gods, perhaps a way to ensure that the dead walked into the afterlife, adorned in the blessings of the sky. Today the necklace rests in a glass case in a museum, its beads aligned in a perfect arc. Visitors pass it quickly, their eyes caught by the gleam of gold artifacts nearby. But those who linger feel something different. The beads are not beautiful in the usual sense. They are small, dark, and unassuming. Yet in their cold shine is the weight of the cosmos, the knowledge that you are looking at a fragment of a world that once burned in the light of a star long extinguished. And somewhere, beyond the reach of our sun, other fragments still wander the void, waiting for the day they too will fall to earth, and perhaps be found by hands that see not just a stone but a story. The steps that descend beneath the sand, Under the high and pitiless sun of northern Sudan, where the horizon wavers as though the very air has been set aflame, there is a place few speak of, and fewer still have seen with their own eyes. The desert here is not simply dry, it is absolute in its emptiness. There are no roads to follow, no caravan paths worn into the ground by centuries of travel. The sand stretches endlessly in all directions, sculpted into long, low waves by a wind that seems eternal. This is a land where sound itself seems to dissolve into the heat, where even the call of birds is absent, and where a traveler can walk for days and see nothing but the shifting dunes. Yet in the middle of this vast and indifferent expanse lies something wholly unexpected, a set of stone steps half buried, leading down into the earth, and into nothing that the eye can follow. The first known record of these steps appears in an 1849 travel diary, written by a European cartographer tasked with charting the fringes of the Nile's less documented tributaries. The diary was primarily concerned with rivers, terrain and settlements, yet in a small, hurriedly written entry, he mentions an anomaly, a flight of worn sandstone treads, aligned perfectly north to south, descending into the very body of the desert itself. No walls accompany them, no surrounding ruin, no sign of a settlement, only the stairs as if the desert itself had been built upon them. The cartographer made no attempt to descend, a sandstorm was already darkening the horizon, and his party was short on water. But the image he recorded, a staircase to nowhere, caught the imagination of those who later read his account. Decades passed before modern archaeologists, intrigued by this brief mention, attempted to locate the site. They found the search to be like chasing a mirage. The coordinates provided by the old cartographer led to nothing but open sand. Satellite imagery revealed no shape, no shadow that could be attributed to stonework. For years the story was considered little more than an embellishment or a traveler's error, until a nomadic herder told a curious tale. He had been traveling between distant waterholes when he came upon what he called stone teeth in the sand. The description was strange but evocative. A small expedition followed him back, and there, exactly as he had said, they found the top 6 steps protruding from a dune. The rest had vanished beneath drifts as fine and treacherous as sifted flour. Up close the steps defied expectation. They were not the crumbling remnants of a ruin, but perfectly cut from single slabs of pale sandstone, edges smoothed with age but unbroken. Each tread bore a subtle concavity, as though thousands upon thousands of feet had worn them down over untold years. Curiously, the risers were taller than one might expect, too tall for comfort, suggesting either a ceremonial purpose or a design for people taller than the average human stature known from ancient remains in the region. And though the desert wind scours everything in its path, filling hollows and crevices with sand, these steps were curiously clean, as though some unseen hand kept them clear. No other ruins exist for many kilometers in any direction. The nearest known ancient settlement, the city of Napata, lies far to the north along the Nile. Napata's ceremonial avenues and pyramids face the life-giving river, not the lifeless desert. There is no reason for such a stairway to exist here. No water, no fertile land, nothing to sustain the builders. Every excavation attempt has been defeated by the desert itself. The sand flows inward like water, filling any pit dug at the site. Heavy machinery bogs down long before reaching the location. Smaller teams with hand tools make slow progress, only to have their work erased overnight by the wind. One expedition managed to clear 10 steps before a sudden storm rolled across the plain, burying them again in less than a day. What lay below that point, whether a landing, a passageway, or more stairs plunging ever deeper, remains unknown. Local oral traditions provide fragments of context, though never the full picture. Elders in some Nubian communities speak of the city beneath the dunes, a place of great knowledge and strange gods, swallowed whole when its rulers defied the will of the heavens. In these stories, the staircase is the last piece of the city that the sun still touches. Travelers who descended, they say, sometimes return days later with eyes clouded white, unable to speak, their minds seemingly lost. Others never returned at all. There is also a tale, rarely told, that the staircase never ends, that it winds forever downward, through layers of forgotten worlds, into a darkness from which no sound returns. Geologists have studied the sandstone and confirmed it to be locally quarried, likely from a ridge several kilometers to the east. This suggests the builders were native to the region, or at least had deep knowledge of it. Yet the stone bears no visible tool marks, as though it had been shaped by a method now entirely lost. The staircase's alignment is even stranger. It points almost exactly toward the rising of the star Sirius during the summer solstice, a celestial event of enormous importance to both ancient Egyptian and Nubian cultures. This may indicate a ritual function, a symbolic descent timed to the movements of the heavens, perhaps as part of a ceremony linking the realms of the sky and the underworld. In 2015, a team armed with ground-penetrating radar scanned the area. The results were tantalizing but inconclusive. Beneath the sand, irregular shapes hinted at possible voids or chambers lying dozens of meters down, but the readings were badly distorted by the constant shifting of the dunes. It was impossible to tell if these were man-made spaces or natural cavities. The desert, meanwhile, remains as merciless as ever. The steps are not always visible. Sometimes for years at a time they vanish beneath a deep covering of sand, as though the earth itself wishes to keep them hidden. Then, after a rare storm peels away the upper layers of the dunes, they emerge again, unchanged, untouched, waiting. Standing at the top, staring down into that slow-falling light, you can feel the weight of centuries pressing in. The wind seems to hold its breath. The heat does not touch you, and the stairs beckon. They are an invitation, a challenge, a silent promise that something waits below, something as old as the desert itself. But to step down is to leave the world you know behind. To place your foot on that first pale tread is to follow in the path of countless others whose names have been forgotten. And as you descend, you cannot help but wonder, did they ever find their way back? Some say the desert has two faces, one for those who travel across it, and one for those who travel beneath it. These steps belong to the second face, and they are patient. They will wait, as they always have, for the next person willing to find out where they lead. The wheel carved before the first wagon. It begins with a road that hardly deserves the name. A pale, narrow strip of beaten earth winds between low hills, so old and sun-hardened that no recent tire has left a mark upon it. The air is thick with heat, and the dry scent of dust that clings to your clothes, to your skin, and to every thought you carry. It is the kind of road that seems to lead not just through space, but through time, and the people who live nearby seem content to let it remain that way. Here, in the far reaches of northern India, the modern world slips into the background. Villages are scattered like small islands in a sea of ochre plains, each with its own rhythm of life. Goats moving between shadows, women drawing water from deep stone wells, children tracing shapes in the dirt with sticks. The older men sit cross-legged beneath banyan trees, watching the road without urgency, as if knowing that anything worth seeing along it will eventually come to them. It is not the kind of place where one expects to find a mystery older than history itself. Yet beyond the last cluster of houses, where the land rises gently toward a line of glittering rock, that is exactly what waits. The hill itself is unremarkable at first glance, a long ridge streaked with pale minerals that catch the light. It has the quiet dignity of something that has stood for ages without need for attention. And yet, if you follow the faint goat path that winds upward, you come to a break in the rock face, just a few meters wide, where the surface flattens into a single broad wall of stone. It is there that you see it. The carving is not large, but it arrests the eye instantly. Even worn by countless monsoon seasons, its form is impossibly precise. A circle, deeply incised into the rock, with 8 spokes radiating from a perfectly centered hub. The lines are not hesitant or uneven. They are deliberate, symmetrical, and carved with a kind of confidence that suggests the maker knew exactly what they were doing. And that is where the trouble begins. Because the archaeologists who examined this hill agree on one thing: the carving predates the invention of the wheel by centuries. When you first hear that claim, it seems absurd. Wheels are among humanity's most essential inventions, but they have a clear place in the archaeological record. The oldest known wheels, solid wooden discs, later spoked ones, emerge around 3500 BCE in Mesopotamia. They appear alongside the first carts and chariots, tied to the spread of agriculture and long-distance trade. Before that, nothing. There are sledges, rollers, and countless ways of moving heavy loads, but no wheels. And yet, here etched into Indian rock, is a wheel older than all of them. The earliest dating attempts place this carving at roughly 3800 BCE, perhaps even older. That alone is enough to unsettle a historian's sense of order. But the detail of the spokes complicates it further, because spoked wheels are an even later development, appearing around 2000 BC. In short, this image should not exist in the time it comes from. The hilltop has no inscriptions that could serve as a key to understanding it. The surrounding carvings, if they even are carvings, are faint, almost erased by erosion. Some look like starbursts, others like looping lines that might once have formed an early script, but none have been matched with known symbols. The wheel, however, remains stubbornly clear, as if its maker wanted it to survive above all else. The first recorded mention of the wheel carving comes from a British surveyor in the 1860s, a man more interested in mapping railway routes than in puzzling over stray marks on a cliff face. In his notes, the carving is described simply as a sun figure with radial lines, purpose unknown. For decades afterward, it was dismissed as exactly that, an abstract sun symbol, perhaps a piece of early religious art. But the measurements tell a different story. The proportions of the spokes, the distance from the hub to the rim, and even the subtle shaping of the rim itself all match the geometry of functional wheels, not stylized suns. A sunburst would not have a rim at all. And why a rim with faintly notched edges? In modern times, researchers have scanned the carving with high-resolution 3D mapping. The notches, they found, are evenly spaced, too deliberate to be random damage. To some, they look like the teeth of a gear, though that explanation opens yet another door of questions. Theories have multiplied over the years. Some scholars suggest it could be a ritual diagram, an ancient yantra or mandala form that coincidentally resembles a wheel. Others point to early astronomical knowledge in the region, proposing that the spokes could represent the division of the year into segments, or even the paths of celestial bodies. In this view, the wheel is not for travel, but for time. Then there are the bolder claims, the ones whispered rather than published, that this is evidence of a forgotten civilization, one that had technology equal to or beyond our own, in certain respects, and that what we call the invention of the wheel was not an invention at all, but a rediscovery. The local villagers tell a simpler story. They say that the wheel is a marker left by gods, a sign that one day a great chariot will return to the earth from the sky. When asked where they heard such a tale, the elders shrug. It has simply always been told that way. Visiting the carving in person, you cannot help but be struck by its placement. It faces a long valley, and if you stand directly in front of it at sunrise during the solstice, the first light of the day passes right through the gap between two distant peaks and falls onto the wheel's center. It is not a casual alignment. Someone placed it with knowledge of the land's rhythms. On days when the sun hits it just so, the mica in the surrounding rock catches fire with golden light. The spokes seem to brighten from within, and the rim gleams as if it were made of metal rather than stone. The effect lasts only a few minutes before the angle shifts, but in that brief span, the wheel feels alive, as though it is ready to turn. Standing there, you begin to realize why it lingers in the mind. It is not simply that it is old, or even that it is out of place in history. It is that it is purposeful. Whoever carved it was not experimenting or doodling. They were recording something important enough to endure thousands of years. The question is, what? The pillar that refused to rust. It rises from the stone courtyard like the spine of some ancient giant, a dark, iron column thrust toward the sky. At first glance, it is unremarkable. A pillar without ornate carving, without the flash of gold or silver. Yet for over 16 centuries, it has stood beneath sun and monsoon, heat and storm, and it has not yielded. It has not flaked, pitted, or crumbled. While other metals surrender to the slow, relentless bite of rust, this one has resisted with a patience that borders on defiance. In Delhi's quiet heart, among the older quarters where the city's pulse beats softly beneath layers of dust and time, the pillar rests in the courtyard of the corporate complex. Tourists drift by, cameras flashing, their footsteps echoing faintly over sandstone. Most pause only briefly, unaware of the enigma that they are standing before. But for those who know its story, or at least the fragments of that story that survive, it is a marvel as strange as any jewel-encrusted throne or golden crown. It is said that the pillar was already old when the Sultanate rose, already ancient when the Mughal domes swelled over the horizon. Inscriptions running along its smooth surface speak of a king named Chandra, whose reign has long since dissolved into mist. This Chandra may have been Chandragupta II, one of the great rulers of the Gupta Empire, a man whose name still clings faintly to coins and legends. But the text offers little else, and the rest must be pieced together from the shadows. Imagine it, around the 4th or 5th century CE, when the pillar may have first been cast. India was a land of empires, yet also of wandering merchants, temple builders, and scholars. In this time, metallurgy was a craft both practical and sacred. Blacksmiths were not mere laborers. They were keepers of fire, interpreters of ore. They could coax from earth and stone a metal that would ring like a bell when struck, a metal that could outlast the generations. The forging of such a column would not have been a casual task. The iron would have been smelted from ore in furnaces lined with clay, the heat fed by charcoal and bellows, the work unending for days. Slag would be drawn off, molten blooms beaten until they took on the pillar's vast shape. No single casting could make it whole. It was likely welded together from multiple sections, each heated and hammered until the seam vanished. But even this is not the heart of the mystery. Iron rusts, it is its nature. In rain, in air, in time's patient crawl, iron yields to reddish decay. This pillar has not. For over 1,600 years, it has stood open to the sky, its surface smooth and dark, its strength intact. Scientists have studied it with the tools of their trade: microscopes, chemical analysis, metallurgical surveys. They found that the iron is remarkably pure, far more so than most wrought iron of later centuries, and that it bears a thin layer of crystalline iron hydrogen phosphate hydrate, a protective film born not from any modern coating, but from the interaction of metal, climate, and time. The people who forged it could not have named the compound. Yet they worked in a way that made it possible, perhaps unknowingly. Their method left the iron's surface rich in phosphorus, poor in sulfur and manganese, a balance that modern steelmakers would recognize as unusual. In the warm, semi-arid air of Delhi, this surface slowly transformed into a shield against rust, a process measured not in years, but in centuries. Still, questions linger. Was this protection purely accidental, or did the metallurgists of the Gupta age understand some secret we have forgotten? In the absence of written manuals or surviving workshops, it is impossible to say, but perhaps it was no coincidence that the pillar was erected not in some hidden forge town, but in the heart of a temple complex, a place where stone and metal alike were bound to the sacred. The original location of the pillar may not even have been Delhi. Some scholars suggest it once stood in Udagiri, a site of ancient rock-cut caves and royal rituals. The pillar's inscription speaks of Vishnu, the preserver, and of a hill where the god's footprint was honored. Was the column once part of that shrine? Was it moved to Delhi centuries later, brought by conquerors who valued its majesty, if not its original meaning? Standing before it now, it is difficult not to think of the countless eyes that have looked upon it. Priests in saffron robes, Mughal courtiers, British officers in starched white, modern schoolchildren clutching bottled water. The same iron, the same silence. Through wars, through dynasties rising and falling, the pillar has endured without even the courtesy of a roof to shelter it. Perhaps that is why it feels alive, not in the way of breathing things, but in the way of mountains or old trees. It has witnessed more than it could ever tell, and if one stands close enough, with a hand lightly brushing its cool surface, there is a strange sense that it knows. The knowledge of how to make it might have vanished, but the pillar itself is here, as though to remind us that the ancients were not ignorant craftsmen groping toward modernity. They were masters in their own right, capable of achievements we still puzzle over. We look at the column and see a riddle, but for them perhaps it was simply the work of a good smith, done well. Yet no record tells of the feast when it was completed, or the prayers said when it was raised, or the sweat that rolled down the blacksmith's arms as he stood back to see it in its full height. All that remains is the iron, and the way it catches the morning light. From here, the story will stretch further into the journeys of kings, the shifting of cities, the hands that tried to claim the pillar for themselves. But for now, it stands as it has always stood, refusing to rust, refusing to yield, its true history locked inside a shell of unyielding metal. Morning broke over the dusty expanse of Delhi, the pale gold light of the sun washing the sandstone walls of the ancient Qutb complex in a warmth that was almost liquid. The air was still, except for the faint rustling of neem leaves above the courtyard, and in that stillness, the iron pillar stood as it had for centuries, unmoving, unchanging, untouched by the slow decay that claimed everything else. By now, word of the pillar's impossible endurance had spread far beyond the city. Scholars, monks, artisans, and rulers from distant lands had come to see it, each arriving with their own theories and expectations. Some brought scrolls and measuring instruments, determined to decipher its secrets. Others came with offerings, garlands of marigolds, tiny brass lamps, coins pressed into the soil at its base, treating it as a relic, a bridge between earth and the divine. In the growing bustle, the pillar remained silent. Its surface, dark and smooth with age, bore no hint of weakness. There was no crumble of rust at its base, no stain of oxidation along its shaft. It was as though time itself had chosen to pass it by. One autumn afternoon, a caravan from Persia arrived at the gates. Among its travelers was a metal worker named Ardashir, a man whose life had been spent coaxing form and function from molten iron. His homeland had given him great skill in forging blades and armor, but it had also given him the humility to know that iron was always temporary. Even the finest steel, polished to a mirror sheen, eventually pitted, flaked, and broke apart. When Ardashir first laid eyes on the Delhi pillar, his heart gave a slow, measured beat. It wasn't the height that impressed him, nor the craftsmanship of the decorative bands etched near its base. It was the impossibility of it, the defiance of the laws every smith learned early in life. He ran his fingers along the cool surface, expecting to feel the faint roughness of corrosion, but the iron was smooth, almost silky, and the faint indentations of its ancient carvings were still crisp after all these years. He pressed his palm against it, thinking he might detect some hidden oil or wax that could preserve it, but there was none. It was simply iron, and yet it was more than iron. That night, as the sun slid into the haze over the city, and the muezzin's calls echoed from minaret to minaret, Ardashir sat with the local smiths under a banyan tree. They spoke of the pillar's origins, how it was said to have been forged in honor of a great king, perhaps Chandragupta Vikramaditya, more than 1,000 years earlier. It might have been a victory marker, or a religious symbol, or even a celestial instrument aligned to the stars. But why does it not rust? Ardashir asked. Iron is like all men, it returns to dust. The oldest smith, a thin man with hands like twisted roots, leaned forward in the dim light. Some say it was made from the bones of the mountains, he murmured, iron so pure that no rain can harm it. Others say it was blessed by the gods themselves, that no force of this earth can bring it down. Ardashir didn't laugh, but he didn't answer either. He knew the nature of men, they explained the unexplainable in ways that kept their hearts steady. But for him, there had to be an earthly reason. He resolved to stay until he found it. Days turned into weeks. He watched the pillar at all hours, in the glare of midday sun, in the blue shadows before dawn, in the moments just after rain, when the world smelled of wet dust and stone. Still, it gave nothing away. And then, one evening, as he traced his hand along its base, Ardashir noticed something strange. The iron seemed to hold the day's warmth far longer than it should. Even after the air had cooled, the pillar was still warm to the touch, as though it carried a memory of the sun deep within its core. He wondered if this, somehow, was part of its endurance, if heat and time had fused its surface in ways no ordinary forge could match. One morning, as the markets filled with the smell of fresh bread and cardamom tea, Ardashir decided to test a theory. He took a small chisel, and with great care, tapped at a place low on the pillar's side. The sound that rang out was not the dull thud of iron, but a high, resonant tone, like a bell struck with a mallet. It seemed to vibrate through his chest. The purity of the sound startled him. He placed his ear against the pillar, and knocked again. The vibration ran deep, deeper than the thickness of the iron itself should allow. It was as if the pillar was hollow, or filled with something lighter, stranger. He glanced around, but no one else seemed to notice. The bustling courtyard went on around him, pilgrims shuffling past, guides pointing to the ancient arches nearby. That night, unable to sleep, Ardashir found himself walking back to the pillar in the silver-blue light of the moon. The gates of the complex were shut, but he climbed them like a younger man, slipping over and landing softly in the sand. The air was cool, scented faintly with jasmine from some unseen garden. The pillar stood in silence, just as it always had. He walked around it slowly, counting his steps, letting his fingertips graze the surface. Halfway around, he stopped. There, on the side that faced the ruins of the old temple, was a faint discoloration, a line no thicker than a hair. He bent closer. It was not a crack, nor a scratch, but something else, almost as if a seam ran through the iron, a seam where none should be. He stood there for a long time, the night deepening around him, the moon drifting westward, and then he realized something that made the hairs on his arms rise. The seam was not visible in daylight. What was it then? A flaw, a join, or the edge of some hidden piece, locked away inside? The thought stayed with him for weeks, but the more he searched for answers, the more questions arose. Locals spoke of the pillar as though it had always been there, untouched and eternal. Travelers told contradictory tales, that it had once stood elsewhere and been moved, that it had been struck by lightning without harm, that it marked the very spot where a great ruler had ascended to the heavens. And through it all, the pillar simply remained, dark and smooth, utterly indifferent to the curiosity it inspired. Ardashir knew he could leave at any time. His caravan was ready to depart, but he also knew that if he left, the pillar would stay in his mind forever, an unsolved riddle, a song whose last note never came, and so he stayed. Beneath the pale wash of dawn, The pillar stood in its silent vigil, the iron surface catching the first light in a way that seemed almost deliberate, as though it understood how to turn sunrise into ceremony. Around it the air still carried the cool breath of night, mingling with the faint scents of earth and stone, and the distant call of waking birds gave the moment a rhythm as ancient as the land itself. It had watched over this place through the rise and fall of dynasties, the shifting borders of empires, and the slow dance of centuries. The sandstone plinth on which it rested had long since softened around its edges, worn down by wind and passing feet, yet the column itself remained untouched by time's usual toll. There were no blooms of rust, no creeping stains, only the deep, steady tone of aged iron, an iron born not from ordinary hands, but from a mastery that whispered of something far older than recorded craft. By the 3rd century after its raising, monks from nearby temples had already begun to speak of it with reverence, calling it a sign of divine favor. They believed that its strength came from purity, both in metal and in spirit, and so they wove it into their rituals. In the cool shade of the temple courtyards, pilgrims would pause to lay their fingers against the column's smooth flank, murmuring prayers for constancy, for the endurance to outlast hardship as the pillar had outlasted storms. The centuries brought change. Armies marched over the plains, banners snapping like fire in the wind. Markets bloomed and withered in the settlements nearby. Rulers came to carve their names in stone, and then vanished into the dust of memory. Yet through all this, the pillar neither wavered nor yielded. Scholars began to arrive, drawn from distant lands by tales of the iron that would not decay. They carried with them instruments of brass and bone, parchment crowded with sketches and notes. Some scraped away the faintest filings from its surface, studying them by lamplight in makeshift tents, muttering in disbelief when their measures failed to match what they expected. They found no secret plating, no hidden varnish, no tricks of placement. The composition was simple, iron, and a careful blend of trace metals, but in a purity no forge of their own time could match. The structure of the metal was so even, so free from flaws, that it seemed less a product of hammer and furnace than something coaxed into shape with patience beyond the human span. Legends began to grow like ivy around the truth. Some said the iron had been drawn from a single mountain vein now lost to the world. Others claimed it was a gift from the gods, a remnant of the age when the earth was still young. A few whispered of celestial origin, that the ore had come from beyond the sky, carried to earth by a falling star. As the world moved toward the modern age, explorers came with their cameras and their clipped accents, mapping the streets and measuring the columns' every angle. They wrote their observations in the languages of far-off capitals, and their images traveled across seas to be displayed in glass cases and leather-bound albums. Yet even under this new kind of gaze, the pillar's secret remained intact. No acid rain, no monsoon, no breath of salt from the distant coast seemed able to mar it. One evening, as the sun dipped low and shadows reached long across the earth, a traveler paused before it. He had come from the deserts to the west, his clothes still carrying the dust of his road, and he stood without moving for a long while. Then in a voice meant only for himself, he murmured that it looked less like a monument, and more like a promise, an oath hammered into metal, sworn on the day it was made, and kept ever since. Night fell, and the stars lit the sky with the same constellations that had watched over the pillar since the first fire cooled in its forge. Somewhere beyond sight, in the folds of the hills, the wind began to rise, carrying with it the scent of rain. Yet here in the heart of the old city, the column stood unshaken, its surface gleaming faintly in the moonlight, waiting for another dawn. The rains had passed in the night, leaving the air washed clean and heavy with the scent of wet stone. In the courtyard, puddles lay in shallow depressions between the paving blocks, each one reflecting the pale grey sky. The pillar stood at the center, its iron surface glistening, not with the dull red of corrosion, but with the deep, dark sheen of metal that had simply shrugged off another assault from the elements. Drops still clung to it in places, gathering and sliding down in slow arcs before vanishing into the ancient earth below. By now, the city around it had grown far beyond the temples and markets of its early life. Traffic hummed along modern roads. The calls of merchants mingled with the metallic chime of bicycle bells, and beyond the low rooftops rose towers of glass and steel. Yet even with this new skyline pressing in, the pillar seemed untouchable, as if its existence obeyed a different measure of time than the world that spun restlessly around it. Historians still came, some with their notebooks and ink, others with machines that hummed and clicked, capturing readings in tiny glowing numbers. They spoke in terms of metallurgy, atmospheric resistance, and passivation layers, dissecting the mystery into parts they could measure. And yet, Every conclusion carried with it the quiet admission that there was something here their instruments could not quantify, an unshakable quality of survival. Old stories persisted alongside the science. Families who had lived in the shadow of the pillar for generations told of travelers who came seeking its blessing before crossing deserts or seas. Priests, their saffron robes moving softly in the breeze, still offered prayers at its base during certain festivals. Children too young to understand its significance would run their hands along its cool surface, laughing when their fingertips came away dry after rain, as if the iron itself rejected water. In the years when the city faced unrest, when streets were emptied of their usual clamor and the night carried the distant echo of shouts, the pillar remained the one constant in the square. People would glance at it in passing, taking some small comfort in the knowledge that this thing, older than their nation, older than their customs, was still there, untouched. It became a kind of anchor, proof that endurance was possible even in the midst of upheaval. One evening, near the close of the warm season, a scholar stood before it long after the crowd had gone. He traced the faint Sanskrit inscriptions carved into the base, feeling each groove worn smooth by centuries of contact. The text spoke of a ruler long gone, of victories forgotten, and of the dedication of this column to the divine. But as the scholar studied it, he began to suspect that its truest meaning lay not in the words but in the thing itself. This pillar was not just an offering to the gods, it was a conversation across ages, a way for those who forged it to speak to the far future. The wind shifted, carrying with it the mingled scents of incense from the temple and cooking fires from the nearby streets. The iron caught the last low flare of sunset, turning briefly into a band of molten orange before the light slipped away. Shadows lengthened, the square emptied, and the scholar departed, his footsteps fading into the night. The pillar remained. It had no need to move, no desire to change. It had been raised with intent and with care, and that was enough to give it purpose. The moon climbed high, silvering its surface, and somewhere in the quiet spaces between night sounds, the city seemed to breathe in unison with it, slow, steady, and unending. And so it stood, as it always had, waiting for the centuries to come, knowing they would pass over it like rain on iron. The cave where paintings glow without light. It began, as so many great discoveries do, with a path no one had taken in living memory. The hills of southern France, gentle in their rise yet scarred with ancient limestone folds, had always hidden more than they revealed. Shepherds moved their flocks across the ridges, children gathered berries in the thickets, and the occasional hunter followed the trail of a hare through the underbrush. But the narrow gully leading to the cave's mouth had been all but swallowed by brambles and wind-blown stone. It was the kind of place you might pass 100 times and never notice, until a slant of late afternoon sun caught the mouth of the earth in just the right way. The opening was not wide, nor was it inviting. A long crack in the rock, just wide enough for a man to slip through sideways, ran at an angle down into darkness. The air rising from it was cool, unnervingly still, and carried a smell that was not quite of the surface world, something faintly mineral, mixed with a hint of age that could not be measured in decades or centuries. The first man to step inside came not as an archaeologist, but as a wanderer. He had no lantern, only the stub of a candle from his satchel, the same he had used the night before to mend a fishing net. The flame quivered as he entered, and the light touched walls smooth with erosion, slick in places where water had trickled over the ages. At first, the cave seemed ordinary. The floor was uneven but dry, the air neither choking nor heavy. The man moved slowly, one hand brushing against the wall, tracing grooves and pockets worn by time. Then the passage widened into a chamber, and there the strangeness began. His candle flame was small, far too small to reach the far edges of the walls, and yet shapes were visible, not the dull shapes of stone catching the faint light, but figures painted in ochres, deep reds, and most astonishingly, a muted green. They were animals mostly, the sweep of a deer's flank, the curve of a bison's horn, the arc of a bird in flight. The colors were faint but unmistakable. He took a step forward, and that was when he noticed it. The candle's light was not reaching them at all. They glowed. It was not a fierce glow, nothing like fire or torchlight, but a soft luminescence, like the last light of day settling on a cloud bank. It came from the pigment itself, as though the paint had stored some forgotten sun, and now, deep underground, chose to release it in the absence of all other light. The animals seemed alive, their outlines gently pulsing with an energy that was neither bright nor dim, but steady and sure. The man's breath caught in his throat. He lowered the candle and shielded it with his hand, letting the darkness come fully. The glow persisted, unchanged, undimmed. In the absence of his flame, the chamber took on a dreamlike quality. The walls seemed to float in the blackness, untethered from the earth, the creatures painted on them adrift in some ancient sea of night. No one believed him when he returned to the village. Glow in a cave, paintings that shone without light. Such things belonged to stories told to frighten children, or amuse them before bed. But he was persistent, and before the year was out, others had gone to see for themselves. Word spread, as it always does. And with it came the archaeologists, the scientists, the men and women who carried notebooks and strange instruments, their faces marked with the quiet hunger of those who sought answers to the world's oldest riddles. They crawled through the narrow gully, ducked into the crack, and entered the chamber. Each one had the same reaction. At first a frown, the slight widening of the eyes, the momentary suspicion that their lanterns were tricking them. Then, as the lights were lowered or extinguished, the realization, these paintings truly did glow. Dating them was no simple matter. The pigments themselves could not be tested without destroying them, and no one was willing to risk that. Instead, the surrounding cave deposits were studied, and the tools, flint blades, bone chisels, found in the deeper recesses of the cave were compared to known examples. The results placed the paintings tens of thousands of years in the past, to an age when the people of this region hunted with spears tipped in stone, lived in shelters of hide and bone, and yet somehow had mastered the making of a paint that could defy the darkness for millennia. The mystery was twofold, not only how the pigment glowed, but why it had been made to do so. In a world without artificial light, what purpose did luminescent paint serve in a cave hidden from the sun? Theories bloomed like moss in shadow. Some said it was ritual, a place where the tribe's shamans came to speak with the spirits of the hunt, the glowing animals serving as guides or guardians. Others imagined it as a gathering place for storytelling, the glow allowing the elders to weave tales even in the deep of night. The scientists brought samples, tiny scrapings, no larger than a fingernail, to their laboratories. Under the microscope, the pigment was revealed to be a complex blend. Crushed minerals were there, as expected, ochre, hematite, but also a substance not common in the region, a kind of crystalline silica laced with trace metals. When exposed to certain conditions, these minerals could indeed produce a faint luminescence, but the conditions were key. In most places, they would not glow at all. Only in the cave's unique microclimate, its humidity, temperature, and complete absence of light, had the glow endured. And so the cave became a place of pilgrimage, not for worship, but for curiosity. Visitors were few, for the location was kept from the public eye to protect the paintings. Those who entered did so with care, knowing each breath could stir the delicate balance of the air, each footstep could bring grains of dust that would settle where they should not. The chamber remained silent, no wind, no rustle of leaves, no call of bird, only the steady, timeless glow of creatures painted by hands long turned to dust, their light outlasting the lives of all who had ever stood before them. No one could say with certainty how long they would go on glowing. Perhaps another 1,000 years, perhaps less. But for now, in the deep heart of the earth, they shone on, mute witnesses to a world long vanished, holding in their painted forms a secret that time itself had failed to erase. The silence in the cave was now deeper than anything the researchers had experienced before, almost as if the earth itself had drawn a breath and held it. They had been inside for hours, though no clock had marked the passage of time. Only the slow ache in their limbs and the gradual drying of the air told them the world outside still moved forward. The faint luminescence along the walls pulsed in a way that was almost imperceptible, a dim breathing of color that seemed to swell and fade, not in rhythm with the flicker of any torch or the shadow of any movement, but according to some other measure entirely. It was as if the pigments had their own internal clock, one that had been running uninterrupted for thousands of years. They had documented dozens of painted animals and figures, each executed with precision and grace that belied the crude tools the artists would have had at their disposal. Horses ran along the stone with slender limbs, bison bent their massive heads in silent grazing, and strange hybrid figures, part human, part beast, loomed in the darker alcoves, and all of them glowed. Not brightly, never enough to read by, but enough that the human eye could catch the curve of a flank, the delicate sweep of a horn, even in the total absence of light. When the team extinguished their headlamps, the chamber did not vanish into blackness. Instead, the images hung suspended, shimmering faintly against the rock. No explanation offered itself easily. The pigments had been tested, microscopic fragments sent to laboratories, and yet no known mineral composition matched their properties. Phosphorescence required exposure to light before emitting it, yet these walls had not seen daylight in millennia. The glow did not fade after minutes or hours, it remained. One of the researchers, a quiet man named Lefebvre, had spent long nights here alone. He said that if you stared at the paintings long enough, you could almost see them move, that a bison's flank might twitch, or the painted eyes of a horse might shift their gaze, ever so slightly. His colleagues dismissed it as fatigue, as the tricks of a mind deprived of reference points in the dark, but when he spoke, he never sounded convinced of his own skepticism. There were legends too, not in books, but carried in whispers from nearby villages. Shepherds spoke of the Cave of Stars, a place where the earth's heart shone in secret. Old men told of ancestors who entered and came out changed, who walked the rest of their lives speaking in half sentences, as if distracted by something they could still see, even with their eyes shut. The team's notes began to reflect not just observations but impressions, the feeling of warmth on the skin when standing close to the wall, the low vibration in the chest that matched no sound, the uncanny sense that the paintings were aware of their visitors. As weeks turned to months, they mapped the chambers in detail. Some of the passageways narrowed to a crawl, others opened into domes so tall the ceiling was lost in shadow. In one of these vast spaces, the glow was strongest. A single figure dominated the wall, a human silhouette, arms raised, body outlined in that same steady luminescence. Around it, circles radiated outward, each ring thinner than the last, as though the painter had been trying to capture the ripple of something unseen. It was here that the researchers noticed a pattern. The glow waxed and waned in tune with the lunar cycle. On nights when the moon was full, even buried deep beneath the earth, the walls shone brighter. During the new moon, they dimmed, though never fully disappearing. The implication was unsettling. The pigments, sealed away from the sky for tens of thousands of years, somehow still responded to it. One evening, when the moon was at its height, they performed an experiment. All lights were extinguished. The group sat in silence, letting their eyes adjust to the dim glow. Then, slowly the glow strengthened. It was not just the paintings anymore. The very stone around them began to take on a faint sheen, like frost under starlight. And then faintly there came a sound. It was not music, not a voice, but a low resonance, a hum that seemed to come from the rock itself. The air trembled with it. The figures on the walls, caught in their eternal poses, seemed more alive than ever before. The oldest among the group, a woman who had spent her life studying Paleolithic art, whispered that perhaps the cave was not merely a gallery, but a place of ritual, that the glow and the hum were part of an experience designed by its creators, that these pigments had been chosen not just for beauty, but for their ability to bridge the gap between the human and whatever lay beyond. The next day, as they prepared to leave, Lefebvre lingered in the glowing chamber. When the others called for him, he didn't answer at first. He was standing before the tall, radiant figure with arms raised, staring into its blank, luminous face. Later he told them that for a moment, he had been certain it had moved, that its arms had shifted ever so slightly, as though in welcome. The expedition eventually ended, reports were written, samples catalogued, photographs archived. But in the years that followed, several members of the team returned to the cave alone, without official sanction, unable to forget the glow. Some said it was simply the most extraordinary example of prehistoric art ever found. Others, quietly, thought it was something else entirely, a message written in light, meant for eyes that had not yet been born when the first brush touched the wall and deep under the French earth. In the perfect blackness, where no wind stirs and no sun reaches, the paintings still glow, waiting. The statue that listens to the sea, under the vast unbroken sweep of the Pacific sky, the island rises from the ocean like the back of some ancient sleeping creature. The sea moves endlessly against its dark volcanic cliffs, shaping and reshaping the rock in a rhythm that began long before any eyes had come to watch. The wind moves across the slopes and the ridges, carrying salt and the faint tang of the far horizon. This is Rapa Nui Easter Island, a place where stone itself seems to carry memory. It is not the largest of the island's mysteries that draws your steps today. Not the famous rows of moai with their silent, unreadable faces, gazing inland as if guarding something unseen. No, what pulls you forward lies apart from the tour paths, away from the familiar silhouettes that have filled books and postcards. The thing you have come to find is older, stranger, and almost entirely unknown, even to many of those who live here. You begin your walk from the northern coast, the land dipping and lifting under your feet, a quilt of grasses and volcanic stone. In the far distance, breakers surge against the cliffs, their spray catching the sun in pale threads. The sound of the sea here is constant, an unending background of breath, sometimes gentle, sometimes hammering with the force of storms born thousands of miles away. The figure waits at the end of a narrow path, half hidden by tall grass and the shadow of a leaning boulder. You might not notice it if you weren't looking, but once seen, it is impossible to forget. It is a statue roughly the height of a tall man, its surface weathered and pitted by centuries of wind and rain. The stone is dark basalt, flecked with lighter minerals that catch the sun like grains of salt. Its shoulders are broad but worn, its arms indistinct, merely implied curves and slopes. The head is gone entirely, whether it fell or was never carved, no one can say. And in its place between the shoulders is the feature that has made it a whisper among the island's elders, a hollow chest carved deep into the stone, smooth on the inside, its oval opening facing the distant sea. You step closer, and the first thing you notice is the air inside the hollow. It is cooler, carrying a subtle dampness. Then, as you lean slightly, the sound comes. Not the direct roar of the surf, not the dry whisper of wind through grass. This is different. A low, resonant hum, rising and falling with the waves, as if the statue itself is drawing the sea into its heart and holding it there. Sometimes it's a tone deep and steady, like the first note of a great drum. Sometimes it shifts into a hollow rush, as if the ocean is passing through some unseen throat before spilling into your ears. The locals call it Tes Taringa Moana, the ear of the ocean, but that name, you are told, is old. It appears in no written records, only in stories passed quietly from one family to another. One such story says the statue was made to listen for storms long before they arrived. Fishermen would come here and place their ears against the stone. If the voice inside grew restless, if it carried a sound like distant breaking glass, they would pull their boats ashore, knowing the sea would turn wild. Another story, older still, says the statue was part of a pair, two figures carved from the same seam of stone, one here by the shore, one far inland. They were connected, it was said, by a path no longer visible. The inland figure would hear the winds of the mountains, and this one would hear the sea. Together they told the chiefs when to send voyages beyond the horizon, and when to stay. You reach out and lay your hand on the weathered basalt. It is warm under the sun, but the edges of the hollow feel cool, almost as if they have never fully dried. Leaning close again, you let the sound fill your ears. This time, it seems less like random echo and more like pattern. A slow pulse, then a pause, then another. Your mind plays tricks, or perhaps it doesn't. Some have claimed they've heard words in the sound, in a language no one remembers. A few have even insisted the rhythm matches the breath of someone sleeping. To understand it, you must look at the stone more closely. The hollow's walls are not simply smoothed by chance, they are shaped. You run your fingers along shallow ridges, spirals carved so subtly they could be mistaken for erosion. They guide the air as it moves inside, amplifying and twisting it, until the sound emerging is something more than mere wind and wave. The technique, whatever it is not found in other moai, nor in the known tools of the island's carvers. In fact, no other statue like this has ever been found here. The archaeologists who have examined it are puzzled. The stone's surface shows tool marks, small, shallow strikes that suggest a steady, deliberate hand. But the precision of the hollow's inner chamber is something else entirely. Some suggest it was shaped using stone tools over decades, even generations. Others suspect it was a piece of older stonework, found and repurposed by the island's ancestors. What they cannot agree on is its purpose. Sound chambers are not unknown in ancient cultures, but they are usually part of buildings, caves, or ritual spaces. Here, standing alone in the open air, the statue is unique, and there is the matter of the missing head. Local elders say it was once crowned with a face turned toward the horizon, eyes half-lidded, mouth closed. It may have been broken by earthquake or storm, or removed intentionally. In recent decades, a diver claimed to have seen a large carved head lying in the shallows near the northern reef, its features too eroded to match with certainty. The currents here are strong, even if it were part of this statue, returning it to its place would be impossible. You sit in the grass for a time, listening. The waves crash and withdraw, the wind shifts, bringing a faint scent of seaweed. Within the hollow, the sound changes, cycling through tones as if it were alive. In the late afternoon, when the sun tips toward the west, the hum deepens, slow and steady, like the heartbeat of the island itself. Perhaps it is the air cooling, or the tide changing, or perhaps something else, a conversation still ongoing after hundreds of years. The mystery of Tetaranga Moana will not be solved today. It is the kind of enigma that resists neat endings, that slips away the moment you think you have grasped it. As you turn back toward the path, the sound follows you for a while, fading only when the wind rises and scatters it into the open sky. Somewhere beyond the line of the horizon, the ocean moves in vast, ancient rhythms, and here, in a hollow chest of stone, it still speaks to anyone willing to lean close enough to listen. The bridge beneath the lake. Beneath the still, silvered surface of a remote lake in China lies something that should not exist. The water ripples gently, stirred only by the occasional breeze sweeping down from the surrounding hills, but far below, hidden from the casual eye, rests a series of stone arches. They stand in eerie silence, their weathered curves half lost to silt and algae, yet unmistakably shaped by human hands. And yet, these arches are far older than the lake that covers them. It begins with the mountains, ancient guardians that cradle the lake in a high, secluded valley. For centuries they have witnessed changes beyond human reckoning. The slow migration of rivers, the rise and fall of villages, the quiet abandonment of roads once thought eternal. Somewhere between their rocky folds, water gathered over time, fed by springs that welled up from deep underground. It formed a lake so serene that its mirror-like surface reflects not only the sky above, but also the strange weight of history below. The arches themselves are crafted from blocks of pale, mottled stone. Underwater, they appear ghostly, their edges softened by centuries of submersion. But divers who have studied them speak of the precision in their curves, the deliberate symmetry that no accident of nature could produce. Each arch is connected by low, flat segments of stone, remnants of a bridge that once carried travelers across a river or valley long before the lake was born. When exactly this bridge was built, no one can say for certain. The surrounding hills hold traces of human habitation dating back thousands of years, from Bronze Age pottery fragments to the half-buried outlines of forgotten villages. Some scholars suggest the bridge could predate many of China's most celebrated early dynasties. Others believe it was part of a medieval trade route, linking settlements that have since been erased from the map. What they agree on is this: the lake that now conceals it did not exist when the bridge was new. Legends among the local people tell of a great shifting of the land, when the earth trembled and waters rushed to fill the valley. In one version, the quake was so violent that the river's course was blocked by a landslide, creating the lake in a matter of days. In another, a dragon descended from the clouds, lashing its tail against the mountainside and breaking the land so water would rise to guard something precious. In both tellings, the bridge became a casualty of the change, swallowed whole by the new waters and left to sleep beneath them. In modern times, the bridge is known only to a handful of divers, fishermen, and curious historians who have ventured into the depths. From above, the water looks opaque and ordinary, giving no hint of the shadowy forms resting below. But once submerged, the scene transforms. Shafts of sunlight pierce the green gloom, illuminating the arches in ghostly fragments. Schools of small fish dart between the stones, and strands of water plants sway with the current, brushing against ancient carvings worn almost smooth. A few of these carvings have survived the ages, weathered motifs of waves, spirals, and unfamiliar symbols. Their meaning is lost, though some researchers speculate they could be marks of protection or good fortune, left by the bridge's builders to bless travelers as they crossed. In the stillness of the lakebed, these symbols seem almost to whisper of a time when footsteps echoed across the stones instead of the muffled silence of water. Every so often, divers report a strange phenomenon: the sense that the arches are larger than they appear, as though the water distorts not only the light, but the very scale of the structure. Some even claim the bridge seems to extend farther than its visible remains, vanishing into deeper silt and shadow, as if leading somewhere no one has yet reached. Could there be more, buried completely beneath the lakebed, an entire roadway or complex of structures waiting to be uncovered? Seasonal droughts sometimes lower the water level just enough to expose the topmost stones, moss-covered and slick from decades underwater. When this happens, locals gather at the shore to watch, murmuring old stories of the bridge's origin. They say that those who walk on its revealed stones risk being followed home by the river spirits who once guarded the crossing, restless now that the bridge no longer serves its purpose. Whether a product of ancient engineering genius or a relic of a long-forgotten civilization, the bridge beneath the lake defies easy explanation. Its survival, even after centuries underwater, speaks to the skill of its builders and the durability of their vision. The fact that it is older than the lake itself turns it into a puzzle, a piece of history displaced in time, preserved not by intention but by accident. And so it remains, resting quietly beneath the water, visited only by those willing to descend into its cool depths. The arches stand as they have for untold centuries, holding the weight of a vanished road, a vanished river, and a vanished world. The lake, calm and inscrutable, keeps its secret well. But if you stand at the shore on a windless day and peer into the stillness, you might just imagine the shape of stone far below, waiting for the day when the waters retreat, and the bridge once again feels the air on its weathered stones. The mask with two faces inside one. It began with the heat, the kind that presses against the skin, and makes the horizon shimmer, blurring earth and sky into one wavering sheet of gold. In the far reaches of southern Mexico, the air in summer does not move quickly. It hangs heavy, carrying the scent of baked clay, dust, and the faint tang of crushed leaves underfoot. It was here, among rolling hills broken by dry riverbeds and the scattered shadows of saber trees, that a group of workers cleared an old plantation field. They were not looking for history, only for stones that could be pulled from the ground and stacked into the low walls that marked property lines. Yet, as so often happens, the earth does not yield its treasures on command. It hides them, keeps them deep, until a chance strike of a shovel or the turn of a season reveals what had been waiting all along. One of the men, his name recorded later, was Mateo Cruz, had been working in a patch where the ground dipped slightly, the soil softer, darker, as if something had burned here long ago. His shovel struck not stone, but something that gave off a hollow sound. He froze. A hollow sound was rarely a good sign. In these lands, it might mean an old pit, the rotted wood of a collapsed granary, or even a burial jar. But the sound was unlike the brittle echo of clay. This was sharper, deeper, as if the object beneath him had its own shape, its own density. Kneeling, Mateo brushed away the loose earth with his calloused hands. Something pale emerged, the color of bone but smoother, harder. The more he uncovered, the more the soil resisted, clinging to it as though reluctant to let it go. Finally, as the sun dipped lower, the shape revealed itself, a mask. It was no ordinary mask. Its surface was carved from a single piece of volcanic stone, polished to a faint sheen. The features were unlike the human faces Mateo knew, slightly elongated, the cheekbones high, the eyes almond-shaped and hollowed deeply. The mouth was closed, the lips pressed together as though in a quiet refusal to speak. But what caught Mateo's attention was not the front of the mask, it was what happened when he tilted it. From one angle, it was a serene face, impassive, timeless. From another, the lines of the carving shifted, blurred, and a second face emerged, overlapping the first. This second face was narrower, the jaw sharper, the eyes set differently. The two were carved into the same surface, their profiles sharing space in a way that the eye could not fully grasp at once. Only movement revealed them, one face fading into the other as the mask turned in the hand. Mateo felt a shiver run along his spine despite the heat. He had seen masks before, in markets, in old churches where fragments of the past were displayed, but never one that changed before his eyes. He called the others, and soon they stood around, passing it from hand to hand, each tilting it, frowning, murmuring. The light of the setting sun caught in the hollows of the eyes, making them glow faintly red. By nightfall, word had reached the nearest town. The local schoolteacher, a man with a fascination for history, came to see it. His name was Luis Herrera, and he carried with him an oil lamp whose steady flame allowed him to study the mask in the dark. He traced the carvings with his fingertips, feeling the subtle ridges where one face bled into the other. This, he said softly, almost to himself, is old, older than the pyramids in the valley, older than the towns we know. He turned it toward the lamp and squinted. Do you see? The second face. This is no accident. This is intentional. Two people in one, or perhaps one person seen in two ways. Luis knew enough of local traditions to understand the weight of such an object. In the ancient cultures of this region, masks were not mere decoration. They were thresholds, gateways between the living and the dead, the mortal and the divine. They were worn in ceremonies where the wearer did not simply disguise themselves, but became something else entirely. And this mask, with its shifting faces, suggested a far stranger transformation than most. Over the following days, stories began to surface. An old woman from a nearby village swore she had seen the mask before, as a child, during a festival that was no longer celebrated. She remembered a dancer who wore it, moving in slow circles as the crowd watched in silence. From the right, the dancer seemed young, with the vitality of the sun at noon. From the left, the same dancer appeared aged, the eyes weary, the mouth downturned. The meaning of this shifting was lost even then, she said. but it was considered a sign of what she could not recall. Luis began to research. He traveled to archives, dusty rooms where the air smelled of old leather and fading ink. He found references to the face that holds another, a phrase appearing in a handful of colonial-era records. Priests, uneasy about the symbol, described confiscating such masks and destroying them, though none of their surviving inventories mentioned two faces carved into one object. It seemed the mask found by Matteo might be one of the last, perhaps the only remaining example. The further Luis dug, the stranger the connections became. Some ancient codices hinted at a deity known only in fragmentary glyphs, a being whose domain was the meeting of paths. This god or spirit was said to see all things from two sides at once, past and future, life and death, truth and illusion. Worship of this figure had apparently vanished before the great empires of the region rose, leaving behind little more than symbols carved into remote stones. Yet the mask's design mirrored these symbols exactly, and the stone it was made from, dark, fine-grained, flecked with crystals, was not local. It had been carried, at great effort, from a volcanic region hundreds of kilometers away. One night, as Luis sat in his small study with the mask before him, the oil lamp flickering, he noticed something he had missed before. Beneath the hollow of one eye, almost invisible, a set of tiny etched lines curved inward, meeting in a spiral. They were not decorative. They were a map, not of the land as it is, but as it was, showing rivers in places now dry, and a coastline further inland than the present one. At the center of the map was a symbol, two intersecting profiles. It took weeks of comparison, but eventually Luis realized that the map pointed to a plateau deep in the mountains, a place largely inaccessible, except by narrow trails. Driven by a mix of curiosity and the pull of something older than reason, he set out. The journey took days, through jungle that swallowed sound, across ridges where the wind carried the cries of unseen birds, and along paths so narrow that the drop beside him seemed to fall forever. When he finally reached the plateau, he found it ringed by stones. Not cut, not stacked, but placed massive boulders forming an incomplete circle. And at the center, half buried in earth and moss, lay a second mask. This one was broken, the faces split down the middle, the fracture clean as if made by a single deliberate blow. Luis knelt in the silence and brushed away the dirt. The carving was the same, two overlapping faces, one fading into the other, but this mask was different in one crucial way. Where the first mask's eyes were empty hollows, this mask's eyes were filled with two polished spheres of black obsidian that caught the sky and held it. He felt a strange stillness settle over him. Around the plateau, the air seemed heavier, the light dimmer, though the sun had not yet set. Somewhere far off, thunder rolled, though no storm clouds were visible. Later, Luis would carry the broken mask back to town. He would place it beside the first, the two halves of a mystery that refused to explain itself. And as he studied them together, turning them slowly, he began to sense what the ancient carvers had known, that the two faces were not separate people, but the same being seen from two moments in time, one at the beginning of life's journey, one at its end. The mask was a reminder, perhaps, that the boundary between these moments is far thinner than we think. And in the quiet hours of the night, when the oil lamp burned low and the wind shifted through the narrow streets, Luis swore he could hear something faint, a whisper, not in any language he knew, but carrying the rhythm of the sea against stone, the turning of years, and the voice of the mask itself, speaking from both of its faces at once. The tomb that points to three suns, beneath the bleached and weathered hills of southern Peru, where the desert wind rolls endlessly across the land, like the breath of something ancient. There is a rise in the earth that barely catches the eye. It is not marked by any great stones, nor crowned by the ruins of a once grand city. From a distance, it looks like nothing more than a natural ridge, one of thousands scattered across this barren plateau. And yet, beneath this unremarkable mound, hidden under the slow drift of centuries, lies a construction that was not placed here by accident. The place has no name in the maps used by travelers, but in quiet corners of nearby villages, there are stories. The older generation remembers being told never to wander too far toward that ridge, not for fear of danger, but out of respect. There is a sense, they say, that the land there listens, that footsteps linger longer in the air than they should, that voices fade strangely, as though swallowed by stone. Few go there on purpose, fewer still return with much to say about it. The entrance is not obvious. It sits at the base of the ridge, where stone meets sand, half concealed by fallen rock and the gradual collapse of the hillside. You could pass within a few steps and never notice it, but if you were to come upon it, perhaps drawn by the way the light bends oddly here. You would see a narrow cut in the rock, just wide enough for a person to step sideways through. The air spilling from it is cool, carrying the scent of mineral dust and the faintest trace of something metallic, like the inside of a deep cave. The passage angles downward almost immediately. The walls are close, their surfaces smoothed with deliberate care, though worn now by time and the gentle polishing of moving air. In places faint carvings cling to the stone, patterns of lines and arcs, so faint they seem to appear only when your eyes look slightly away from them. There is no sound except the crunch of grit beneath your boots and the occasional sigh of wind from somewhere ahead. After a time, the passage widens. The air grows still. A single stone step marks the transition into the chamber beyond, as though crossing from one world into another. The room is not large. It is almost humble in scale, but its geometry draws the eye immediately. The walls are angled, not in a way that suggests collapse or accident, but in careful measured design. The ceiling slopes gently upward toward a point directly above the center of the room, where the stone is worked so smooth it reflects even the faintest glimmer of light from your lamp. At the center lies the sarcophagus. It is cut from a single block of dark basalt, its surface unbroken by any seam. There is no decoration, no inscription, only the pure form of the stone, polished until it drinks in the light and gives back a soft sheen. Around it, the floor is etched with lines, thin grooves radiating outward in arcs and straight segments, intersecting at points that seem arbitrary until you begin to follow them with your eyes, and then you notice the openings. They are not windows, exactly, more like narrow slits in the stone, cut with an exactness that feels almost unnatural. There are 3 of them, each positioned at a different height, each aimed toward a specific point on the horizon. At first it makes little sense. They seem too small, too oddly placed to serve any real purpose. But the truth of them becomes clear only when you return at the right time. The first time the alignment reveals itself is at the summer solstice. The light of dawn threads perfectly through the first slit, a narrow blade of gold that travels unerringly through the passage to touch the basalt lid of the sarcophagus. It strikes the center precisely, leaving the rest of the chamber in shadow so that the stone glows alone in the dark. The second slit tells a different story. It catches the sun not as it rises now but as it rose centuries ago, its path shifted since then by the slow turning of the Earth's axis. And yet when the date of that long-past alignment arrives, the sunlight still pierces the chamber, as if the builders had carved not for their own time, but for the memory of the sky as it once was. The third opening is the strangest of all. It does not align with any sun that has yet been seen in our time. Its target is a rising point that will not occur until long after we are gone, an astronomical event still centuries in the future. This slit waits, patient for a dawn that has not yet come, its purpose known only to the minds that planned it. To stand there, in that chamber, knowing that its builders were able to place stone with such unerring precision across 3 moments in time, one in their past, one in their present, and one far in their future, is to feel the smallness of one's own years. The walls themselves seem to reinforce that feeling. Their carvings, when studied, reveal images of figures standing beneath arcs of the sky, holding rods and sighting instruments. Some of these arcs are dotted with symbols of the sun, single discs for the ordinary year, doubled or tripled for something more rare. The figures are never shown as large. They are dwarfed by the lines and circles above them, as if to say that the true subject of these carvings is not the people at all, but the heavens themselves. In certain parts of the chamber, the stone carries a strange smoothness that seems to come not from polishing tools, but from something else, perhaps the constant touch of light over countless years. The angles of the walls channel the faintest glow towards specific carvings, as if certain symbols were meant to be illuminated only at precise moments. Archaeologists who have measured the place speak in low tones about its accuracy. The cuts of the stone match angles that can be calculated only with careful astronomical observation. And yet, no advanced tools have been found nearby, only copper chisels, simple plumb lines, and fragments of cord that might have been used to measure or align. Still, the builders achieved something that would challenge even modern surveyors. Among the few artifacts recovered were clay vessels painted with spirals of red and gold, perhaps representing the turning of the sky. Thin sheets of hammered copper bear incised patterns that matched the grooves in the floor, as if they were portable maps of the chamber's design. There were also small stones shaped into miniature ridges, each marked with a point where the sun might rise or set, teaching models perhaps for those who studied the horizon. Some believe this was not a tomb for an individual, but for a role, a position passed down through generations. The sarcophagus may have held over time the remains of many guardians of the calendar, each entrusted with watching the movement of the three suns across centuries. Others think it was never meant to hold the dead at all, but something else, something tied to the light itself. Whatever its true purpose, the chamber feels alive during those rare alignments. The air seems to change as the beam of light enters, growing warmer, thicker somehow, as though the stone itself is drawing breath. Dust motes drift lazily through the golden path, suspended as if reluctant to fall. For a few minutes, the lines on the floor become part of the light's journey, guiding it toward the sarcophagus until the glow fades, swallowed again by shadow. Outside, the ridge offers no sign of what lies beneath. The desert wind still scours its slopes, and the horizon remains vast and empty. But those who have stood in the chamber know that it is not empty at all, that somewhere beneath that quiet surface, the earth is keeping a long conversation with the sun, one that began before the present age and will end only when the last alignment is complete. And when that third sun finally rises, centuries from now the light will fall exactly where they intended, completing a cycle that took lifetimes to shape, a cycle carved into stone and into time itself. The dagger forged from three metals of unknown origin, under the endless Anatolian sky where ancient winds whisper through the rugged landscapes of modern-day Turkey, lies a story of a dagger unlike any other, a weapon forged from three metals whose origins have baffled scholars, alchemists, and historians alike. This is not merely a tale of craftsmanship, but a saga woven through time, spanning forgotten civilizations, celestial mysteries, and the indomitable human desire to merge the mundane with the divine. The dagger, slender and elegant, was first unearthed deep within a ceremonial chamber near the Taurus Mountains, a region steeped in history and legend. It was wrapped with reverence in delicate fabrics, alongside relics that spoke of ritual and reverence. The immediate impression was of a blade both deadly and sacred, one that could slice through flesh or pierce the veil between worlds. What set this dagger apart was not its shape or the intricate carvings on its hilt, but its composition, a seamless fusion of three distinct metals, none of which had ever been found together in such harmony anywhere else on Earth. The first gleamed with the warmth of aged bronze, its surface polished to a glow that caught the light like a captured sunbeam. The second shimmered like the purest silver, yet resisted oxidation and decay as if time held no sway over it. The third was unlike any metal known, dark and dense, with an almost otherworldly shimmer that defied categorization, as though it held the secrets of the cosmos within its atomic lattice. From the moment of its discovery, the dagger posed a paradox. How could such disparate materials be forged together in a time when metallurgy was believed to be rudimentary? What civilization possessed the knowledge and skill to combine these metals with such precision and artistry, and where had these metals come from? Archaeologists immediately recognized the dagger as a ceremonial artifact, its presence in the burial site hinting at a figure of immense power or spiritual significance. The carvings on the hilt, a complex array of symbols and geometric patterns, suggested a belief system steeped in the cosmos, the cycles of the sun and moon, and perhaps forces beyond human comprehension. The blade was not merely a weapon but a symbol of authority, of connection to the divine, and of mastery over nature itself. Scientific inquiry brought its own revelations and frustrations. Spectroscopic analysis revealed that the first metal was a refined copper alloy, but far purer and more resilient than typical bronze. The second, once thought to be iron, showed properties akin to meteoric iron, with a crystalline structure that baffled metallurgists. The third metal was a mystery. Its elemental makeup did not align with any known natural or artificial alloy. Its durability and sheen suggested it might have been processed through techniques lost to time or derived from materials beyond Earth. Legends from the region offered tantalizing, if cryptic, clues. Ancient texts spoke of a trinity metal, a sacred substance forged in the fires of the gods, gifted to kings and priests to symbolize their divine right. Some believed the dagger was crafted by a secret guild of smiths who guarded celestial knowledge, combining earthly metals with fragments of fallen stars to create objects that transcended mere mortality. These tales, while compelling, remained unverified, shrouded in myth and speculation. As research deepened, the dagger's story intertwined with the wider cultural and historical currents of Anatolia. This land had long been a crossroads where Hittites, Phrygians, Lydians, and later Romans mingled their customs and crafts. The dagger's style bore hints of these influences yet did not fit neatly into any single tradition. It was both ancient and timeless, a relic from a forgotten era when the boundaries between man, metal, and mystery blurred. The dagger's discovery also raised profound questions about ancient technology and the extent of human ingenuity. How had smiths achieved such a flawless fusion of metals without modern tools? What secrets had been lost as empires rose and fell, their knowledge buried beneath the sands or lost to conquest and time? Some researchers posited that the dagger was evidence of a civilization far more advanced than previously thought, one capable of metallurgical feats that would not be replicated for millennia. In museums, the dagger rests in quiet majesty, its surface cold and smooth, inviting contemplation and wonder. Visitors gaze upon it, drawn by the enigma of its metals and the stories they hint at. It is a reminder that history is a mosaic of mysteries, where each artifact holds not only facts but dreams, beliefs, and questions that echo across centuries. The dagger forged from 3 unknown metals remains a testament to the limitless reach of human creativity and the enduring allure of the unknown. It beckons us to look beyond the surface, to seek the hidden fires that shaped it, and to remember that some secrets, though buried deep, continue to shine with the light of stars long vanished. The tower that echoed only once, under the endless skies of Anatolia, where the sun scorches the earth by day and the stars wheel silently by night, there stands a relic from a forgotten era, a tower whose mystery has puzzled and enchanted generations. Known among locals as the tower that echoed only once, this ancient cylindrical ruin is unlike any other architectural marvel. It holds a secret not of grandeur or conquest, but of sound and time, a phenomenon so subtle yet so profound that it has drawn scholars, mystics, and curious travelers to its weathered stones for centuries. The tower rises solitary on a gentle hill, surrounded by the rolling plains and fields that have fed civilizations for millennia. It is modest in height, perhaps no more than 20 meters, but its perfect cylindrical form and the smooth, seamless surface of its inner walls set it apart. Built from limestone blocks so precisely cut and fitted that no mortar is visible, it seems crafted not merely to stand but to perform, to channel something unseen and unheard elsewhere. Here, sound behaves in a way that defies the natural laws known to everyday experience. Long before the advent of modern acoustic science, the people who lived in this region passed down stories of a place where voices lingered and time slowed. According to these oral traditions, if one were to speak inside the tower's hollow core, their voice would return to them, not as an immediate echo, nor as a series of repeated reflections like in a canyon or a cathedral, but as a single, solitary echo precisely delayed by the span of one human heartbeat. The interval, fleeting and intimate, seemed to tie the structure itself to the rhythm of life. This unique acoustic feature is what earned the tower its name and its place in local lore. It became a symbol of connection between body and environment, sound and silence, life and the stillness of stone. For those who believed in the sacredness of breath and pulse, the tower was a sanctum, a place where one could speak, listen, and feel the profound passage of time compressed into a single returning note. The tower's origin, shrouded in the mists of time, has been pieced together by historians and archaeologists through fragments of evidence and the subtle clues hidden in its construction. Scholars date the tower to the late Hellenistic period, roughly between the 3rd and 1st centuries BCE, a time when Anatolia was a vibrant crossroads of Greek, Persian, and indigenous cultures. The region was steeped in philosophical inquiry, scientific discovery, and religious innovation. It is within this fertile cultural milieu that the tower likely took shape, not as a fortress or temple, but as a place devoted to the exploration of sound, time, and perhaps the divine. The tower's precise cylindrical shape is crucial to its acoustic mystery. Unlike the irregular ruins scattered throughout the region, this tower is an architectural marvel of geometry and symmetry. The inner walls rise smoothly, curving upward without interruption, their limestone surfaces polished by centuries of wind and rain but still remarkably even. The absence of windows or niches inside creates a continuous reflective surface for sound waves, allowing them to travel around the circumference before converging back at the center. At the heart of the tower lies a circular stone platform, slightly raised and worn smooth by countless footsteps. It is here that visitors stand to experience the echo firsthand. When a single word or sound is spoken, it does not immediately bounce back as one might expect in a typical echo chamber. Instead, the sound waves circle the interior, traveling a distance precisely calculated by the tower's circumference and stone density, returning after a delay that coincides with the average length of a human heartbeat, roughly 1 second. This delicate delay transforms the echo from a simple repetition into a profound experience. It feels less like a return of sound and more like a pulse, a heartbeat of the earth itself resonating through stone and air. To stand inside the tower and hear one's own voice returned in time with one's pulse is to confront the fragile boundary between existence and silence. In the 19th century, early travelers and explorers documented their encounters with the tower, often recounting the experience with a mixture of wonder and reverence. One such traveler, a French Orientalist who journeyed through Anatolia, described standing within the tower's walls at dawn. He whispered a word into the still air and felt the hush deepen as the sound lingered. Then, just as his heart beat, the echo returned to him, clear, resonant, and almost sentient. He wrote that in that moment the tower seemed alive, breathing in time with his own being. With the development of modern science, researchers sought to understand the tower's acoustic properties more precisely. Acoustic engineers and physicists visited the site, employing sensitive microphones, sound generators, and timing instruments. Their analyses confirmed that the tower's shape, size, and materials create a natural delay in sound reflection. The cylindrical design guides sound waves in a circular path, allowing them to return to the source after completing a full rotation around the interior wall. This journey corresponds closely with the timing of a heartbeat, a natural coincidence that evokes powerful symbolic meaning. Yet while science can explain the physical mechanics of the echo, it cannot capture its emotional and cultural resonance. The heartbeat echo transforms the tower from a static ruin into a living dialogue between past and present, stone and breath. It invites visitors to pause, to listen, and to consider the rhythms that connect all life. Local folklore adds layers of meaning to the tower's mystery. Some tell of ancient priests who used the tower to meditate on the nature of time and existence, speaking prayers or chanting mantras timed to the heartbeat echo, seeking communion with the divine. Others speak of lovers who exchanged vows within the tower, their words echoing once as a sacred bond. There are stories of lost souls who whispered their names into the stone and heard them returned in a heartbeat, a sign that they had been remembered. The tower also inspired philosophical reflections on the nature of time and sound. Some thinkers proposed that the tower was a physical manifestation of the concept of kairos, the opportune moment when time seems to stand still and meaning is revealed. The echo's delay invites contemplation of how life's moments pulse between silence and sound, presence and absence. Despite its cultural importance, the tower's history is marked by mystery and gaps in knowledge. No written records describe its original builders or purpose. Archaeological surveys have uncovered fragments of pottery and tools nearby, indicating human activity, but nothing definitively tied to the tower's function. The site itself is isolated, far from the centers of ancient cities and trade routes, suggesting it served a specialized or sacred role rather than a practical one. Over centuries, the tower weathered natural and human forces. Earthquakes shook Anatolia, empires rose and fell, but the tower endured. Its stones bear scars of time, chips, cracks, and erosion, but the acoustic phenomenon remains intact. Preservation efforts in the modern era have aimed to protect the tower's fragile walls and maintain its unique sound properties. Visitors today still seek the experience that has fascinated humanity for so long. Tourists, acoustic scientists, spiritual seekers, and historians converge at the tower, standing silently as they speak and wait for the heartbeat echo. The moment of return is invariably profound, an intimate reminder of the passage of time, the fragility of life, and the enduring dialogue between stone and soul. To stand within the tower that echoed only once is to enter a place where physics and poetry intertwine. It is a space where sound is both transient and eternal, where every whispered word carries the weight of history, and where the heartbeat of the past beats softly in the present. The tower calls to those who listen deeply, inviting them into a quiet communion with the rhythms of existence itself. As the sun sets over the Anatolian plains, casting long shadows across the land, the tower stands steadfast, a silent guardian of sound and time, echoing life's pulse once and only once, before returning to stillness. It waits patiently for the next voice, the next heartbeat, and the next moment when stone and breath will meet again, in the delicate dance of echo and silence. The coin minted for a kingdom that never was? Far beyond the reaches of time's ordinary reckoning, where history's shadows grow long and faint, there exists an enigma crafted in gold and mystery, the coin minted for a kingdom that never was. This singular artifact, a brilliant gold coin, bears the image and name of a ruler whose existence has baffled scholars, whispering secrets of a kingdom erased from the annals of recorded history. Its very presence challenges the foundations of what is known about ancient Greece, urging us to peer beyond accepted chronicles into the silent depths of forgotten realms. The coin itself is small yet exquisite, no larger than a child's palm, its surface meticulously embossed with intricate artistry. On one side, the effigy of a regal figure stares out with serene authority, crowned not with the traditional laurel wreath, but with a radiant circlet that seems almost otherworldly in design. Surrounding the portrait, an inscription in archaic Greek letters spells out a name unlisted in any surviving texts: King Thalios. This name, unfamiliar and unattested, sparks both wonder and skepticism. How could such a monarch exist without leaving a trace beyond this coin? On the reverse side of the coin, the image of a majestic palace stands amid stylized waves and soaring eagles, symbols traditionally associated with divine favor and the protection of the gods. Below the palace, an enigmatic emblem, an intertwined trident and olive branch, adds to the coin's aura of mysticism and power. The artistry is undeniably Hellenistic, yet its subtle peculiarities suggest an origin that does not fit comfortably within the known geography or timelines of ancient Greek polities. The coin's discovery came about quite by chance in the early 20th century during an excavation near the ancient city of Olympia, a site renowned for its temples and the birthplace of the Olympic Games. Amidst the layers of soil and broken pottery shards, workers unearthed this pristine gold coin, perfectly preserved as if hidden deliberately and guarded by the earth itself. Its unexpected presence there sparked immediate scholarly interest, for no known records mentioned a King Thalios or a kingdom fitting the imagery on the coin. From the moment the coin entered academic discourse, debates erupted across disciplines. Numismatists examined the metal's purity and weight, confirming its consistency with high-quality coinage of the classical period, roughly between the 5th and 3rd centuries BCE. Yet linguistic experts struggled with the inscription. While the letters were undeniably Greek, their style and arrangement differed markedly from contemporary standards. Some proposed the name was a cryptic title or a symbolic figure rather than a literal monarch. Others posited the coin was a forgery, an elaborate hoax by an ancient or modern hand. But scientific tests including metallurgical analyses and patina dating consistently confirmed the coin's authenticity and antiquity. The historical silence about King Thalios and his kingdom deepened the mystery. Extensive reviews of Greek literary sources, from Herodotus to Thucydides and beyond, yielded no mention of such a ruler. No inscriptions on stone, no temple dedications, no mentions in funerary stelae. It was as if the kingdom had been deliberately erased or had vanished without a trace. This absence invited theories ranging from political conspiracy and natural disaster to supernatural intervention. Was King Thalios a usurper, whose memory was struck from history? Or was the kingdom an ephemeral realm, existing on the margins of the known world, glimpsed only fleetingly before disappearing beneath the waves of time? Archaeologists, intrigued and puzzled, launched expeditions to the regions surrounding Olympia, hoping to uncover ruins or artifacts connected to this lost kingdom. Several potential sites were investigated: hilltops crowned with foundations too vague to assign, coastal ruins submerged beneath shifting sands, and caves where faint traces of human occupation hinted at transient settlements. None conclusively linked to King Thalios, yet each discovery added layers of complexity and richness to the narrative of vanished civilizations. One of the most compelling lines of inquiry involved the coin's iconography. The palace depicted on the reverse bore striking similarities to palatial complexes known from the Eastern Aegean and Anatolia, regions that experienced waves of cultural exchange and conflict during the Late Bronze Age and Early Iron Age. The intertwined trident and olive branch, while unique, evoked symbols of Poseidon and Athena, deities whose domains overlapped in myth and worship. This suggested that King Thalios's realm might have been a syncretic fusion of maritime power and agrarian fertility, a kingdom whose identity straddled the boundaries of myth and history. Folklore preserved by local villagers in nearby mountain villages offered cryptic references to a king of the hidden waters, a sovereign who ruled a prosperous land, swallowed by the sea after defying the god's will. Tales of sunken palaces and voices heard beneath waves, while dismissed by many scholars as fanciful, paralleled the coin's imagery and hinted at a cultural memory entwined with natural cataclysms. Some hypothesized that King Thalios's kingdom was among the many coastal polities devastated by seismic upheavals, earthquakes and tsunamis that reshaped the Aegean world and obscured entire cultures beneath water and sediment. In pursuit of this possibility, underwater archaeology became a vital tool. Divers explored the shallow waters off the western coast of Greece, mapping submerged ruins and identifying remnants of ancient harbors. Among these submerged structures were foundations that defied easy classification, their arrangement unlike the classical Greek cities better known from history. Could these be remnants of Thalais's capital? The question tantalized but remained unanswered. The coin also opened avenues into the study of political symbolism and propaganda in the ancient world. Coins were not merely currency, but also instruments of royal messaging, bearing images and inscriptions designed to assert legitimacy, divine favor, and authority. That a coin featuring a previously unknown king existed suggested a realm with enough organization and influence to mint currency and circulate it, implying a political entity that rivaled or coexisted with better documented kingdoms. Some scholars speculated that King Thalaisses represented a regional ruler who challenged larger powers such as Macedon or the Hellenistic successor states, whose histories were often recorded by victors with vested interests. The erasure or omission of Thalaisses could thus be a result of political rivalry and historical revisionism, a fate not uncommon in ancient times. In recent decades, advances in technology have revived efforts to unravel the coin's secrets. High-resolution 3D imaging and spectroscopy revealed microscopic details of the coin's wear and tooling, suggesting it circulated widely over a period supporting the idea of a real functioning economy tied to the lost kingdom. Geographic Information Systems (GIS) analyses attempted to model ancient trade routes, proposing possible paths through which the coin might have traveled, hinting at economic and cultural connections far beyond the territory of its origin. Yet for all the scientific and historical investigation, the coin retains its aura of enigma. It is a shimmering fragment of a story lost to time, a golden thread that connects us to a vanished world, inviting us to imagine a kingdom once vibrant and real, now reduced to a solitary emblem in the earth. Its mystery reminds us of history's vastness and its silences, urging us to listen closely to the echoes that survive in stone, metal, and memory. To hold the coin minted for a kingdom that never was is to grasp a piece of history both tangible and elusive. It is a reminder that the past is not always written in stone, that some tales are hidden in plain sight, and that every artifact carries the possibility of rewriting what we think we know. As scholars continue to debate and explore, the golden face of King Thalaisses files enigmatically, watching over a kingdom lost but not forgotten, shimmering forever in the quiet depths of time's embrace. The road that fades into the ocean. Far along the rugged and untamed coastline of Japan, where the restless sea tirelessly meets the stoic land, there exists a marvel so subtle yet profound, it has both bewildered and captivated generations. Known to the local fishermen and villagers as the road that fades into the ocean, this ancient pathway is unlike any other. A long stretch of carefully placed paving stones that extends from the rocky shore directly into the deep, vanishing beneath the waves at high tide, only to re-emerge as the water recedes. It is a silent mystery carved into the boundary where earth surrenders to sea, a testament to human ingenuity and a whisper of forgotten times. The coastal landscape itself is a place of striking contrasts. Jagged cliffs rise sharply from the shore, their faces etched by centuries of storms and relentless waves. Hidden coves, cradle pockets of smooth sand, and the ever-changing tides sculpt the shoreline into a living canvas. It is here, among the crash and spray of the ocean, that the road asserts its presence, disappearing and reappearing with the rhythm of the sea, inviting wonder and questions in equal measure. Historical records of this submerged pathway trace back centuries, embedded in old coastal maps and referenced in the journals of intrepid explorers and local elders alike. Descriptions tell of a stone causeway that appears briefly during low tides, offering a straight, unwavering path that extends beyond the reach of land, seemingly leading to nowhere but the depths. Fishermen's tales speak of traversing this passage when the tide withdraws, stepping upon the flat stones beneath their feet, only to watch the path dissolve beneath the incoming water. These stories blend mystery with reverence. Some claim the road was once a sacred way to a lost temple or village, swallowed by the ocean. Others warn of spirits that guard the submerged stones, deterring those who seek to follow it too far. Modern investigations have embraced technological advances to unlock the secrets of this enigmatic structure. Marine archaeologists equipped with sonar mapping devices and underwater drones have surveyed the submerged path with increasing precision. Their findings reveal a construction of remarkable sophistication, flat, volcanic stones shaped and placed with deliberate intent, forming a causeway of remarkable straightness and consistent width. This architectural feat speaks not only to the skill of its builders, but also to a profound understanding of the natural forces at play, the tides, the waves, and the shifting seabed. Despite extensive study, the original purpose of the road remains elusive. One prevailing theory is that the pathway served as a jetty or pier, a functional structure facilitating fishing, trade or transport for a coastal community that has since been lost to rising seas or tectonic shifts. Supporting this are the scattered remains of pottery shards, fishing implements, and other artifacts dating back to the Jomon period, approximately 14,000 to 300 BCE, suggesting a thriving human presence intimately connected with the sea. Yet, no ruins of settlements or permanent structures have been conclusively identified beyond the shore, leaving a gap between material evidence and narrative. Another compelling hypothesis posits a spiritual or ceremonial role for the road, a sacred route designed to bridge the terrestrial and marine realms, a physical manifestation of religious beliefs centered on the ocean's power and mystery. The proximity of ancient shrines, burial mounds, and ritual sites along the coast lends credence to this view, painting a picture of a culture deeply attuned to the sea as both provider and enigma. Geological research adds another layer of complexity. The region's history is marked by frequent seismic activity, including earthquakes and land subsidence events, which have dramatically altered the coastline over millennia. It is plausible that the road originally lay above water, linking human habitations or sacred places, only to be submerged as the land shifted or sea levels rose. Such phenomena could explain the presence of a constructed causeway seemingly leading into the depths, a vestige of a landscape now submerged and lost. Local folklore further enriches the story, weaving together elements of history, myth, and cautionary tale. Among the coastal communities, legends speak of a prosperous village claimed by a great flood, leaving only the stone road as a silent marker of the past. Others recount stories of brave or foolish souls who ventured along the path as the tide ebbed, vanishing beneath the waves without a trace. These narratives, passed down through generations, reflect a cultural memory that both respects and fears the road, underscoring its place in the collective imagination. The road's existence challenges modern assumptions about ancient coastal life and engineering prowess. It reveals a sophisticated grasp of stone masonry and an intimate relationship with the shifting marine environment. The builders accounted for the ocean's moods, fashioning a structure resilient enough to withstand tides, storms, and time. The stones, carefully quarried and precisely placed, endure beneath the waves, their smooth surfaces telling a silent story of labor, purpose, and endurance. Standing at the shore where land yields to sea, one can almost hear the echoes of footsteps long vanished. The stones, worn smooth by centuries of water and wind, offer a path into the unknown, a physical connection to a time when humans lived not apart from nature, but woven into its cycles and secrets. To walk this ancient road is to tread a boundary between past and present, land and ocean, seen and unseen. The road that fades into the ocean remains a profound symbol of mystery and resilience, inviting those who encounter it to reflect on the impermanence of human endeavor against nature's vast and relentless forces. It is a monument to the deep and enduring relationship between people and the sea, a reminder that beneath the surface of everyday life lies a world shaped by history, memory, and the ceaseless dance of earth and water. Thank you for joining us on this journey through history's most astonishing mysteries. Remember, the past is full of secrets waiting to be uncovered, and every story brings us closer to understanding the world around us. If you enjoyed this exploration, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts, and don't forget to tell us where you're watching from. Until next time, keep seeking, keep wondering, and stay curious.